What if God gave you a mission, and you decided to run the other way? Not ignore it, not delay it, but literally run away. That is exactly what happened to a man named Jonah. Jonah was not an ordinary man. He was a prophet, someone chosen to deliver messages from God. When prophets spoke, kings listened. Nations trembled. Lives changed. But one day, Jonah received a message he did not want to deliver. God told him to go to the great city of Nineveh. Nineveh was massive, powerful, and feared across the ancient world. But it was also known for something else: violence, cruelty, wickedness. The people there were enemies of Jonah's nation. And now God wanted Jonah to warn them, to tell them to change their ways, to give them a chance to repent. Jonah did not like that idea at all. He believed those people deserved judgment, not mercy. So instead of obeying, Jonah made a decision. He would run as far away from God's command as possible. He traveled to a port city and found a ship sailing in the opposite direction. If God wanted him to go east, Jonah would go west, far west, across the sea. Soon the ship left the harbor, carrying Jonah away from the mission he refused to accept. For a moment, it looked like his plan was working. The wind was calm, the ocean was quiet, and Jonah finally relaxed. But somewhere above the dark waters, a storm was already forming. A storm so violent that even experienced sailors would fear for their lives. Because Jonah was about to discover something no one can escape. You can run from people. You can run from responsibilities. But there is one thing no human being can ever run from. And soon, the sea itself would prove it. The ship sailed slowly away from the harbor. The city behind them grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the horizon. For Jonah, it felt like freedom. Freedom from responsibility. Freedom from a mission he never wanted. He had done it. He had escaped. Or so he thought. The ship cut through the calm waters as it headed across the open sea. The sailors moved confidently across the deck, adjusting ropes and sails. These men were experienced. They had spent their lives on the ocean. Storms were nothing new to them. But on that day, something unusual began to happen. Far above the water, dark clouds started to gather. The wind changed direction suddenly. At first, it was only a gentle breeze. Then the wind grew stronger. The sky darkened quickly. The waves began to rise. Within minutes, the peaceful ocean transformed into chaos. A powerful storm crashed down upon the ship. Waves slammed against the wooden sides. The wind howled across the deck. Thunder roared across the sky. The sailors rushed from one side of the ship to the other, trying desperately to control the sails. This was no ordinary storm. Even the most experienced sailors could feel it. Something about this storm was different. The waves grew taller. The ship began to tilt dangerously as water crashed over the sides. One sailor shouted above the wind, "We're going to break apart." Fear spread across the deck. The men did everything they could to save the ship. They tightened ropes. They lowered sails. They threw heavy cargo into the sea to lighten the load. But the storm only grew worse. The wind screamed like an angry force of nature. The ocean seemed determined to destroy the vessel completely. And soon, the sailors did something that revealed just how desperate they had become. Each man began praying to his own God. Some knelt on the deck. Others cried out loudly to the heavens. They begged for mercy, but the storm did not stop. Meanwhile, something strange was happening below the deck. While the sailors were fighting for their lives above, Jonah was asleep, deep asleep. The ship rocked violently. Water splashed across the deck. Men were shouting in terror. Yet Jonah lay in the darkness below, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to face what was happening. Finally, the ship's captain rushed below deck. He could not believe what he saw. There, in the middle of a storm that threatened to destroy them all, Jonah was sleeping. The captain shook him awake. "How can you sleep?" he shouted. "Get up. Call on your God. Maybe your God will notice us so that we will not perish." Jonah slowly opened his eyes. The storm was still raging above them. But deep down, Jonah already knew something the sailors did not. This storm had not come by accident. This storm was following him. Back on the deck, the sailors gathered together. They had done everything they could, but nothing worked. The storm continued to grow stronger. Finally, one of them suggested something unusual. "Let's cast lots," he said. "In this way, we will know who is responsible for this disaster." Casting lots was an ancient way of making decisions when people believed the gods were revealing hidden truth. The sailors agreed. One by one, they cast the lots. Then they waited. When the result appeared, the men stared at it in silence. The answer pointed to one person, Jonah. Every eye on the ship turned toward him. The wind roared around them. The waves crashed against the sides of the ship. But in that moment, the storm seemed almost quiet compared to the tension among the sailors. They surrounded Jonah. One of them demanded answers. Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? Another asked quickly, what is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? What people are you from? The frightened sailors wanted to understand. Why was this happening? Jonah took a deep breath. Then he told them the truth. I am a Hebrew, he said, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, the one who made the sea and the dry land. The sailors looked at him in shock. The storm suddenly made sense. This was not a random disaster. This was something far greater. And when Jonah finally admitted the reason for the storm, the men became even more terrified. I am running away from the Lord. The words hung in the air as thunder rolled across the sky. The sailors could hardly believe what they were hearing. You're running from the God who made the sea? One of them shouted. What have you done? But the storm continued to grow stronger. The waves were now crashing violently against the ship. The vessel could not survive much longer. Desperate, the sailors asked Jonah one final question. What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? Jonah looked out over the dark water. He knew the answer. He had known it all along. This storm is because of me. Then he spoke the words no one expected. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. The sailors stared at him in disbelief. But the ocean roared louder than ever, and the ship was moments away from breaking apart. Soon, they would be forced to make a decision that would change Jonah's life forever, because waiting beneath those violent waves was something no one on that ship could possibly imagine. The storm grew worse by the minute. Waves towered over the small wooden ship like moving mountains of water. Each crash against the vessel made the sailors fear it would split apart at any moment. The wind screamed across the deck. Ropes snapped. The sails whipped violently in the darkness. These men had spent their entire lives on the sea, yet none of them had ever seen a storm like this. And standing in the middle of it all was Jonah. The sailors stared at him in disbelief. Moments earlier, he had told them the truth. The storm was not an accident. It was not bad weather. It was not fate. This storm had been sent because he was running from the God who created the sea itself. And now Jonah had given them the only solution. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. The men looked at one another in shock. They were sailors, not killers. Throwing a man overboard during a storm meant certain death. No, one of them said quickly. There must be another way. Instead of following Jonah's command, the sailors rushed to the oars. They tried desperately to row the ship back toward land. If they could reach the shore, maybe everyone could survive. The men pushed the oars with all their strength. Their muscles strained. Their hands bled from gripping the wood. But the ocean fought against them. The wind drove the ship farther away. The waves slammed into the hull again and again. No matter how hard they rowed, they could not escape the storm. Finally, the sailors realized the truth. There was no way out. The ship would not survive much longer. Slowly, they turned back toward Jonah. But before doing what he had asked, the sailors did something unexpected. They prayed, not to their own gods this time. They cried out to the God Jonah had spoken about. "O Lord," they shouted above the roaring wind, "please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent person. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased." The sailors were trembling. They had never prayed like this before. They were begging for mercy. Then the moment came. Two sailors stepped forward. They grabbed Jonah by the arms. The wind roared louder than ever. The ship tilted violently. Water rushed across the deck. For a brief moment, Jonah looked out across the dark ocean. The waves rose like walls around them. He knew what was coming, but he did not resist. The sailors lifted him over the edge of the ship, and then they let go. Jonah fell into the raging sea. The moment his body hit the water, something incredible happened. The storm stopped. Instantly, the wind vanished. The waves collapsed back into the ocean. The violent chaos that had nearly destroyed the ship disappeared in a matter of seconds. The sea became calm, completely calm. The sailors stood frozen in shock. Just moments earlier, they had believed they were going to die. Now the ocean looked as peaceful as glass. Silence filled the air. The men slowly looked at one another. Fear filled their faces. But this time it was a different kind of fear. Not fear of the storm. Fear of the power they had just witnessed. The God Jonah had spoken about was real. The sailors fell to their knees on the deck. They worshipped the Lord. They made promises. And they offered sacrifices in gratitude for their lives being spared. But far below the quiet surface of the water, Jonah was sinking. The cold sea closed around him. The darkness swallowed him completely. He sank deeper and deeper into the ocean. The last thing he saw was the faint light of the surface far above him. Then even that disappeared. Jonah was alone in the depths of the sea. The pressure of the water surrounded him. His lungs burned as he struggled to breathe. He had run from God. He had caused a deadly storm. And now, this was the end. Or so it seemed. But what happened next would become one of the most famous moments in all of biblical history. Because Jonah did not drown. Instead, something enormous was moving through the dark waters. A massive creature. Silent. Powerful. A creature no human could fight. No sailor on the ship could see it. Jonah could not see it either. But it was coming. The creature opened its mouth. And in a single moment, Jonah disappeared. Not into the ocean, but into the belly of a giant fish. God had prepared it. And just like that, Jonah's strange journey was only beginning. Because for the next 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah would be trapped in a place no human had ever survived before. Inside the darkness of a living creature. And in that darkness, Jonah would finally face the one thing he had been running from all along. Darkness. Total darkness. When Jonah opened his eyes, he could see nothing. No sky. No ocean. No light. Only thick, heavy darkness surrounded him. The air smelled strange and damp. The ground beneath him was soft and slippery. Everything around him moved slowly, like the walls themselves were alive. Because they were. Jonah was not in the ocean anymore. He was inside a living creature. The giant fish had swallowed him whole. At first, Jonah could hardly believe he was still alive. Moments earlier, he had been sinking into the cold depths of the sea. He had felt the water closing around him, pulling him down into darkness. He thought it was the end. But instead of drowning, he had been caught by something enormous. And now he was trapped. The creature moved through the ocean, its powerful body cutting through the deep waters. Every movement made the walls around Jonah shift and tighten. The space was narrow, wet, uncomfortable. There was no way out. Jonah sat in silence. His breathing was slow and heavy. For the first time since he had run away from his mission, there was nowhere left to run. No ship, no land, no crowd, no distraction. Just Jonah and God. Time passed slowly in the darkness. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Jonah replayed everything that had happened. God had spoken to him. He had received a clear command. Go to Nineveh. But instead of obeying, Jonah had run in the opposite direction. He had boarded a ship. He had hidden below the deck. He had hoped that somehow he could escape the responsibility placed on him. But now he realized something important. No one can outrun God. Not across land. Not across the sea. And certainly not into the depths of the ocean. Jonah leaned against the living walls of the creature. His body was weak. The darkness pressed around him. And finally, Jonah began to pray. It was not a quick prayer. It was not a casual prayer. It was the cry of a man who had reached the lowest point of his life. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help. Jonah whispered into the darkness. And you listened to my cry. He remembered the moment he had fallen into the ocean. The waves had swallowed him. The currents had dragged him downward. Seaweed had wrapped around his head. He had believed his life was ending. But God had not abandoned him. You hurled me into the depths, Jonah prayed. Into the very heart of the seas. And the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. Jonah paused. His voice trembled. I said, I have been banished from your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The darkness around him felt endless. But something inside Jonah was beginning to change. When he had boarded the ship, he had been filled with anger. Anger toward the people of Nineveh. Anger toward the mission God had given him. He believed those people deserved punishment. He believed they did not deserve mercy. But sitting alone in the darkness of that creature, Jonah realized something. He himself had needed mercy. He had disobeyed God. He had run away. He had caused a storm that nearly killed innocent sailors. Yet God had not allowed him to die. Instead, God had rescued him in the most unexpected way possible. Jonah continued to pray. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains, I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. Jonah closed his eyes. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. For the first time since he had fled from his mission, Jonah felt something he had not felt before. Gratitude. Even inside the belly of a fish. He was alive. When my life was fading away, Jonah prayed softly. I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you. Then Jonah spoke words that revealed a new understanding. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will make good. Then he finished his prayer with a powerful declaration. Salvation comes from the Lord. 3 days passed. 3 long days. Inside the darkness of the giant fish. But during those 3 days, Jonah changed. The man who had once run away from God was now ready to obey. And somewhere above the ocean, God gave another command, not to a prophet, but to a creature of the sea. The giant fish suddenly turned. It swam upward, faster and faster. The creature moved toward the surface of the water, toward the shoreline, toward dry land. Then, in one violent motion, the fish opened its mouth, and Jonah was thrown out onto the shore. He lay on the sand, gasping for air. The sun shone above him. The wind touched his face. He was alive. After 3 days inside a living creature, Jonah had been given a second chance. But the story was not over yet, because soon, God would speak to Jonah again. And this time, Jonah would not run. Jonah lay on the shore for a long time. The warm sand beneath him felt strange after the cold darkness of the ocean. The wind blew gently across the coastline, carrying the smell of salt and distant waves. For 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah had been inside the belly of a giant fish. He had faced fear. He had faced regret. He had faced the truth about himself. And now he had been given something very rare in life. A second chance. Jonah slowly stood up. His body was weak. His clothes were torn. His skin burned from the strange place he had survived. But his mind was clear. Because once again, God spoke to him. Go to the great city of Nineveh, the voice said. Proclaim to it the message I give you. This time, Jonah did not argue. This time, he did not run. He had learned something inside the darkness of that fish. Running only leads deeper into trouble. So Jonah began the long journey. The road to Nineveh stretched across dry land and dusty paths. Travelers and merchants moved along the roads, carrying goods from distant kingdoms. But Jonah walked with a different purpose. Every step brought him closer to a place he once tried desperately to avoid. Nineveh. The city was enormous. Ancient historians described it as one of the greatest cities in the world. Its walls were massive. Its gates were guarded. Its streets were crowded with people from many nations. Markets overflowed with goods. Temples towered above the buildings. Thousands upon thousands of people lived within its walls. But Nineveh was also known for its cruelty. The empire that ruled from this city had conquered many lands through violence and fear. Stories about their brutality had spread across the ancient world. And now Jonah had been sent to warn them. When he finally arrived at the gates of the city, Jonah stopped for a moment. He looked at the towering walls before him. This city was powerful, rich, confident. Surely its people would laugh at a lone prophet from a distant land. But Jonah stepped forward anyway. He entered the city. The streets were crowded with merchants shouting their prices, travelers moving through the markets, and soldiers guarding the roads. Jonah walked through the center of it all. Then he began to speak. His message was short, very short, yet it carried enormous weight. 40 more days, Jonah shouted, and Nineveh will be overthrown. The words echoed through the streets. People stopped walking. Some laughed. Others stared in confusion. But Jonah continued. 40 more days. 40 more days, and this city will fall. Jonah walked deeper into the city, repeating the warning again and again. At first, only small groups of people listened. But soon the message began to spread. A prophet had arrived. He was warning of destruction. And strangely, his words carried a sense of urgency that people could not ignore. Something about his voice made them uneasy. The message traveled quickly through the city, from merchants to travelers, from travelers to guards, from guards to officials. Eventually, the message reached the palace. The king of Nineveh heard the report. A foreign prophet was walking through the city announcing its destruction. 40 days, the messenger repeated nervously. 40 days, and the city will be overthrown." The king sat silently for a moment. No one knew what he would say. Then something unexpected happened. The king stood up from his throne. He removed his royal robe. He laid aside the clothing that symbolized power and authority. Then he put on rough cloth used for mourning. And he sat down in ashes. The entire palace fell silent. The king had taken the warning seriously. Soon he issued a decree across the entire city. The message was carried through every street and marketplace. By the decree of the king and his nobles, the proclamation declared, "Do not let people or animals taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence." Then the king added words that revealed something surprising. "Who knows," he said, "God may yet relent. With compassion, he may turn from his fierce anger, so that we will not perish." Across the city, something incredible began to happen. People stopped their normal lives. Merchants closed their markets. Families gathered together. Even the animals were covered with rough cloth as a sign of mourning. The entire city began to fast. Men, women, children, even the king himself. Nineveh had heard the warning, and they were changing. But far outside the city walls, Jonah sat watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Because deep in his heart, Jonah still believed the city deserved destruction. Yet something unexpected was already beginning to unfold. Something Jonah had never wanted to see. God was showing mercy, and the prophet who had finally obeyed was about to face a lesson he never expected. The days passed slowly. Jonah waited outside the city of Nineveh. From the hill where he sat, he could see the massive walls, the crowded streets, and the thousands of people who lived inside. He had delivered the message exactly as God commanded. 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. Now there was nothing left to do but wait. Jonah expected destruction. He imagined the ground shaking. He imagined the city collapsing. He imagined fire or judgment falling from heaven. After all, Nineveh was known for its cruelty. Surely a city like this deserved punishment. But something strange had happened inside those walls. The people had listened. From the king to the poorest citizen, they had taken the warning seriously. They had fasted. They had prayed. They had turned away from their violence. And God saw it. God saw that they had changed. God saw their repentance. So instead of sending destruction, God showed mercy. The disaster Jonah had predicted never came. The city remained standing. Life continued. Children played in the streets. Markets reopened. The people of Nineveh were spared. But instead of celebrating, Jonah became furious. He stood up angrily and cried out to God. "Isn't this what I said would happen when I was still at home?" Jonah shouted. "That is why I tried to run away to Tarshish." Jonah's voice was filled with frustration. "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God who relents from sending disaster." To many people, those words would sound like praise. But Jonah meant them as a complaint. He had not wanted Nineveh to receive mercy. He believed they deserved judgment. Now he felt embarrassed. His warning had not come true. The city still stood. So Jonah said something shocking. "Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." Jonah was so upset that he would rather die than see Nineveh forgiven. But God answered him with a simple question. "Is it right for you to be angry?" Jonah did not respond. Instead, he left the city. He walked to the east side of Nineveh and built a small shelter for himself. Then he sat down in its shade. From there, he continued to watch the city. Perhaps he still hoped something would happen. Perhaps he still believed destruction might come. The sun beat down heavily from the sky. The heat in that land could be intense. Jonah sat there, uncomfortable and frustrated. But then God did something unexpected. Overnight, a plant began to grow beside Jonah. It rose quickly, spreading large leaves above him. The plant provided shade from the hot sun. For the first time in a long while, Jonah felt comfortable. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But the next morning, something else happened. God sent a worm. The tiny creature attacked the plant. Soon the plant withered. Its leaves shriveled and died. The shade disappeared. Then God sent a scorching east wind. The sun beat down fiercely on Jonah's head. The heat became unbearable. Jonah felt weak and exhausted. Once again, frustration filled his heart. "I wish I were dead," Jonah said again. "It would be better for me to die than to live." Then God spoke to Jonah once more. "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" Jonah answered immediately, "It is." and I am so angry I wish I were dead." Then God explained the lesson Jonah had been missing all along. "You have been concerned about this plant," God said. "Though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight." Jonah listened silently. Then God spoke the words that revealed the true message of the story. "And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" The question hung in the air. Jonah had cared deeply about a plant that gave him comfort for a single day, but he had refused to care about an entire city filled with people. People who had changed. People who had turned away from evil. People who had been given a chance to live. In that moment, Jonah was forced to confront a difficult truth. God's mercy was bigger than his anger, and God's compassion reached far beyond the boundaries Jonah had placed in his heart. The story does not tell us exactly what Jonah said next, but the lesson was clear. God cares for all people, even those we believe do not deserve it. Jonah sat in the scorching heat. The plant that once shaded him was gone. The wind blew hot across the desert hills, and the sun burned down from the sky. For a long moment, Jonah said nothing. God's question still echoed in his mind. "You have been concerned about the plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow." Jonah had been upset when the plant died. He had felt angry, frustrated, even miserable. Yet the plant had only existed for a single day. Jonah had done nothing to create it, nothing to grow it, nothing to keep it alive. And still, he cared deeply when it disappeared. But Nineveh was different. Nineveh was not a plant that lived for one day. It was a great city. More than 120,000 people lived there. Families, children, workers, farmers, people who had lived their entire lives without understanding the truth. People who had made terrible choices. People who had lived in violence and cruelty. Yet when they heard the warning, they changed. They humbled themselves. They turned away from their evil ways. And when they did, God showed mercy. That was the lesson Jonah struggled to understand. God's compassion was bigger than Jonah's anger. God's mercy was greater than Jonah's judgment. Jonah had believed that only certain people deserved forgiveness. But God saw something Jonah could not see. God saw the hearts of people, even the people of Nineveh. The story ends in a very unusual way. We are never told what Jonah said after that moment. The Bible does not record his response. It simply leaves the question hanging. And perhaps that is intentional, because the question was never meant for Jonah alone. It was meant for everyone who hears the story. If God cares about an entire city filled with people who once lived in darkness, shouldn't we care too? If God is willing to forgive those who turn back to him, shouldn't we learn to show mercy as well? Jonah had run away because he did not want his enemies to receive compassion. But God's love is not limited by human boundaries. It reaches further than we expect, further than we sometimes want. And sometimes, God's greatest lesson is not about changing other people. Sometimes the lesson is about changing us. Jonah began this journey running away from God. He crossed the sea. He faced a deadly storm. He sank into the depths of the ocean. He spent 3 days inside a giant fish. He walked through the streets of Nineveh delivering a warning. But the most important part of Jonah's journey was not the storm, or the fish, or even the great city. The most important part was the lesson he learned about God's mercy. A mercy that is patient, a mercy that gives second chances, and a mercy that reaches even the people we least expect. Because the story of Jonah is not only about a prophet who ran away. It is about a God who refuses to give up on people, even when they run.